Deep inside your brain, right this very second, there is a tiny, really highly specialized cluster of tissue. And as you're sitting there listening to this, maybe you're comfortable drinking a coffee on your commute or whatever, there is a very good chance that specific piece of your brain is literally shrinking.
Yeah, it is a biological reality of the modern environment we've built for ourselves, basically.
Right. And that is exactly what we are dismantling today. So, in this deep dive, we are going after what our sources call the disease of mediocrity.
Oh, I love that phrase.
Yeah, it's so good. We're pulling from, well, the extreme endurance world, specifically the unbelievable story of David Goggins, and putting that alongside classical philosophy and some really cutting-edge neuroscience, because we want to understand the actual physical mechanics of why human beings are just hardwired to default to average, and, how you can forcibly rewire that machinery.
Right, because the absolute irony of our era is that we have essentially engineered this totally frictionless existence.
Yeah.
Food arrives at the tap of a screen, our rooms are perfectly temperature controlled, our entertainment is just algorithmically spoon-fed to us to keep us on the couch.
Like a padded cell, basically.
Exactly, a comfortable padded cell. And this absence of struggle is causing a profound, measurable atrophy in our neurology. I mean, there's a quote from Socrates in the source material that frames this perfectly. He said, "It is a shame for a person to grow old without ever seeing the beauty and strength of which their body and mind are capable."
Wow, yeah.
But we aren't just looking at this as some philosophical pep talk today. We're going to look at the literal structural changes that happen in the human brain when you make the active daily choice to suffer.
Okay, I want to dive right in there with the biology. Because before we can talk about how to beat this gravitational pull toward the couch, I really need to understand why it's so powerful. Like, why is it that when my alarm goes off at 5 a.m., my own brain feels like it is actively campaigning against me?
Well, because it is. It literally is. This is rooted in what neuroscientists sometimes call the frog brain bias.
The frog brain bias.
Yeah, it's driven by your limbic system, which is the oldest, most primitive part of your brain. And you really have to understand its core function. It was not designed to help you write a novel or start a business or get a six-pack. It was designed purely to keep you alive in a highly dangerous, resource-scarce world.
Oh, so it's constantly calculating like caloric expenditure versus your probability of survival.
Precisely. So your modern prefrontal cortex, the logical, forward-thinking part of you, that part knows waking up early to run is good for your cardiovascular health long-term.
Right.
But your limbic system, it does not care about long-term health metrics.
It just feels the cold air.
Exactly. It feels the cold air in the room, it feels the fatigue in your legs, and it interprets that 5:0 a.m. alarm as a literal physical threat to your survival. It's whispering to you, hey, if you leave this warm blanket, you're going to burn calories that you might need to run from a tiger later. Go back to sleep.
That is wild. So when you struggle to get out of bed, you aren't actually experiencing some moral failing of laziness. You are fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming.
You're a slave to your biology, yeah. But the recent data on this is totally paradigm shifting. Dr. Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist out of Stanford, has highlighted research on this very specific region of the brain. It's called the anterior midcingulate cortex, or the AMCC.
The one that might be shrinking right now.
The very one. So when researchers look at brain scans,
Okay, wait. So if I want to grow this area, if I want more willpower, I just need to start working out more. Like if I force myself to run 5 miles every morning, this part of the brain physically gets bigger.
not exactly. And this is the most crucial distinction in Huberman's findings. You cannot grow the AMCC just by exercising or doing hard things. It only grows when you do things you explicitly, actively do not want to do.
Wait, I'm struggling with the mechanics of that. Are you saying if I naturally love running, right, and I go out and run 10 miles with a huge smile on my face, my AMCC doesn't grow at all?
Correct. Because there's no internal resistance for you to overcome.
Oh, wow.
The friction is the requirement. But if you absolutely hate cold water, let's say, and you stand there staring at a freezing shower for 5 minutes, terrified, and then you finally force yourself to step into it, that is what makes the tissue grow.
That is crazy. So it's a muscle that only feeds on reluctance.
Yes. It requires the presence of psychological reluctance. The moment you push through an activity you genuinely dread, that tissue physically expands. But the terrifying part is that it's highly volatile. If you stop doing things you hate, the AMCC quickly begins to shrink back down.
That That reframes everything. I mean, it actually makes me think of this specific anecdote from the source material about David Goggins. So there's this 25-year-old kid who comes to Goggins looking for advice. He's overweight, but he's also just completely lost in life. He tells Goggins, he wants to join the military, but then he says maybe he'll open a gym instead or maybe start a landscaping business. He's just bouncing between a dozen different life paths.
Right. And Goggins correctly diagnoses that the career confusion is just a symptom, not the actual disease.
Exactly. Goggins figures out the kid's real problem wasn't a lack of direction, and it wasn't even his weight. The core issue was that the absolute second this kid felt any kind of friction or discomfort on any path, he immediately abandoned it and picked a new one.
He had spent his entire life avoiding pain.
Yeah, which meant he had zero confidence to face challenges. If we look at that through the lens of what you just explained, that kid's AMCC must have been practically non-existent.
Oh, absolutely. He was entirely governed by his limbic system, which, naturally leads to the ultimate question here. If neurobiology dictates that doing things we intensely hate is the only way to build endurance, what does that actually look like at the absolute extreme of human physiology?
Well, let's look at the extreme. Let's talk about Goggins in San Diego, the 160-kilometer ultramarathon.
It is probably the most visceral case study of the AMCC in action that exists.
Right. So to set the stage for you listening, Goggins enters a 100-mile race with a 24-hour time limit. And he does this with zero specialized training for ultramarathons, and he's weighing far more than a typical runner. For the first half of the race, he manages to get by on adrenaline and his physical foundation from his Navy SEAL days. But around kilometer 112, so roughly 12 hours into the race, his body enters a state of catastrophic failure.
And the medical deterioration he experienced there is just difficult to even comprehend.
It's super gruesome. His kidneys were shutting down to the point where he was urinating dark blood. Fluid was accumulating in his lungs. He had developed severe stress fractures, like the bones in his feet and legs were literally splintering under his own weight.
Just brutal.
Yeah, and he finally collapses into this folding chair. He's looking down at his feet, and his white socks are turning entirely red from the blood pouring out of severe blisters. Everything, logic, doctors, everything was screaming at him to stop or he was going to die.
And this is the moment where the traditional concept of motivation completely shatters.
Yeah.
Because motivation is a highly fragile resource. We can think of it like lighter fluid, right? It's highly combustible. It creates a massive bright flame for a few seconds, but it burns out almost immediately.
So true.
When Goggins was sitting in that chair with his organs failing, he tried to rely on motivation.
Right. He tried telling himself, I'm doing this to raise money for charity, or I want to inspire people.
And his brain instantly rejected it. When your physiology is in a crisis state, when your limbic system believes you are literally dying, positive affirmations are completely useless. You cannot tell the brain that is experiencing organ failure, hey, I'm doing this for a good cause. The brain just says, I don't care about the cause. We are bleeding to death.
That makes total sense. But I'm stuck on how he actually gets out of that chair then. Because if positive affirmations, charity, and, believing in yourself all get rejected by a brain in hell, I don't see what fuel is even left to burn.
Well, he had to abandon motivation entirely and trigger a profound identity shift. He stopped looking for external reasons to run. Out of that agonizing silence, he just looked inward and told himself he was going to finish simply because of the undeniable reality of who he was.
Wow.
Our source censors the exact phrasing, but he essentially told himself he was going to stand up because I'm one hard mother bleeper.
He stripped away all the ego, all the external validation. It was just this raw animal truth, like a primal refusal to let his identity be compromised by the pain.
Yes, and the physiological response to that internal shift is what's so fascinating. By anchoring entirely to his identity, he bypassed the panic of the limbic system and fully engaged that highly developed AMCC. It triggered a massive release of adrenaline. He taped his fractured, bleeding feet, stood up, and actually finished the final 48 kilometers.
Which is insane. And that brings us to the scientific takeaway from that race, this concept he calls the 40% rule.
The 40% rule, exactly.
The idea that when your brain tells you that you are completely, totally exhausted and cannot take another step, you are actually only at 40% of your total capacity. But wait, I have to challenge this premise a little bit. How can that 40% rule possibly be biologically accurate? If someone is sitting in a chair, urinating blood, and their bones are literally fracturing, their body is clearly at 0%, not 40.
Right.
How does science justify a 60% reserve tank when the organs are literally failing?
It's a brilliant question, and it comes down to what exercise physiologists call the central governor theory.
Oh,
Your brain calculates fatigue, not just based on the actual mechanical breakdown of your muscles, but as a preventative emotion. The fatigue you feel isn't your muscles actually failing. It is an emotion generated by your brain to force you to stop before you do irreversible damage.
oh, so it's a safety mechanism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your limbic system sets the emergency brake incredibly early at roughly 40% of your absolute physical limit to maintain a massive safety margin.
Mhm.
So yes, Goggins was physically destroying his body, but mechanically the muscles could still physically contract. He proved that the governor can be overridden.
So the exhaustion I feel after, say, a long day of work sitting at my computer isn't a true physical limit. It's just my brain's conservative software trying to save battery life.
Yep. You have a 60% reserve tank still sitting right there.
But if we know the 60% reserve exists, how do we access it without having to be in some life or death crisis on a racetrack? I mean, if we want to tap into it daily, we have to completely restructure how we view discomfort. Which brings us to what psychologists call the pain paradox.
The pain paradox. It is simple to understand, but incredibly difficult to execute. It states that the more you try to run away from pain, the more suffering life will inevitably inflict upon you. But if you voluntarily choose pain, the suffering of life basically loses its power over you.
It makes me think of micro tears in a muscle. Like if you want a muscle to become denser and more resilient,
Yeah,
you have to subject it to the friction of heavy weights, right?
exactly.
The tearing is the literal mechanism for growth. The paradox is that by actively damaging the tissue in a controlled way, you prevent it from being weak and vulnerable in the future.
That is the perfect biological equivalent. And it's a concept that has resonated through centuries of philosophy. I mean, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle is the way."
Right.
The philosopher Osho noted, "Don't choose pain, but when it comes, embrace it. It purifies you."
Yeah.
Khalil Gibran described it as the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. When you voluntarily subject yourself to friction, you are immunizing your psychology.
And there's a neurochemical cascade that happens when we do this too, right? The winner effect.
Yes, the winner effect. When you force yourself to complete a highly difficult task, your brain releases a potent spike of dopamine and testosterone. And we really need to be clear about dopamine here. It isn't just about pleasure. It is the molecule of motivation and pursuit.
Okay, that's a huge distinction.
Right. When you achieve something difficult, your baseline dopamine actually rises, rewiring your neural pathways to seek more challenges. Winning becomes a biological habit. But crucially, losing is also a habit.
See, this is where I think we really misunderstand self-care in modern culture. We often treat dopamine like something we should just give ourselves for free.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're stressed, the modern instinct is to scroll through short-form reels for 3 hours, or eat highly processed junk food, or just binge a television show to numb the emptiness. We spike our dopamine without any friction.
And we call it self-love.
Exactly. But because there was no effort, the dopamine crashes below baseline, leaving us feeling emptier and more lethargic than before. Like, when you hit the snooze button, you aren't just getting 10 extra minutes of sleep. You are chemically training your brain's baseline to accept defeat.
You are eroding the AMCC. So the question is, how do we artificially create that friction? The source material offers a highly unconventional visualization technique for this.
Yeah, enemy visualization. This is so wild. Instead of picturing a peaceful beach or visualizing yourself crossing a finish line, you actively imagine someone in your life who deeply dislikes you or who has doubted you or who actively wants to see you fail.
Right.
And you use that spite, that pure, unadulterated stubbornness as fuel to keep going when you want to quit. You push through simply to deny them the satisfaction of your failure.
And the reason this works is rooted in neuroplasticity and the motor cortex. When you intensely visualize an action, especially when it's emotionally charged by something primal like spite or anger, your brain activates the exact same neural pathways and motor cortex regions as if you were physically performing the action.
Wait, really? Just by imagining it?
Yes. You are essentially rehearsing the friction. You are building the neural architecture of resilience before you even take a physical step.
That is fascinating. So it's not just a mind trick. You are literally prepping the hardware in your brain.
Exactly.
So let's move from the theory into the practical application. Let's build the toolkit for the listener. If someone wants to start engaging that 60% reserve and rebuilding their AMCC, where do they actually start?
Well, we can look at how Goggins started. Long before the ultramarathons, when he was 300 pounds and working night shifts as an exterminator, he created what he called the accountability mirror.
The accountability mirror.
Yeah. He would stand in front of this bathroom mirror every night and relentlessly tell himself the objective truth. You are fat, you are lazy, you are wasting your potential. He completely stripped away all the comforting excuses his ego had built up.
Absolute brutal honesty, no toxic self-love. From there, the sources outline 3 very clear steps. Step 1 is the hell yes or no rule. The premise here is that if you set a goal for yourself, and thinking about that goal doesn't terrify you or give you goosebumps, you need to throw it out. It's too small.
Right, if the goal doesn't scare your limbic system, it will not provide the friction necessary to grow the AMCC.
Make total sense.
Step 2 is the 40% push. This is the daily microscopic application of the theory. Tomorrow, when you're exhausted at work or at the gym and you hit that mental wall where you feel entirely depleted and want to stop, remind yourself of the central governor theory. Tell yourself, my brain is only at 40%, and then push for just a fraction more.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, read one more page, do one more repetition, work for 5 more minutes. That tiny extra margin separates you from the crowd.
You basically just have to prove the limbic system wrong in real time. And then step 3, kill the victim. You have to systematically incinerate every single excuse you've been clinging to. I don't have enough time. My boss doesn't like me. I wasn't born with the right genetics or enough money. The reality is, even if those things are true, the problems belong to you now, which means the solution is entirely your responsibility.
Completely. Now, we've discussed the biological rewards of doing this, the upside. But we must also look at the terrifying consequences of ignoring it. Because if you decide that seeking friction is simply too exhausting and you'd rather just enjoy the frictionless modern world, history provides a chilling warning.
Oh, the mice.
Yes. In the 1960s, a scientist named John Calhoun conducted a study known as the Universe 25 experiment.
I know this one. He basically built a localized utopia for mice, right?
He did. He built this massive, perfect enclosure. The mice were given unlimited food, unlimited water, perfect climate control. All predators were removed, and the environment was kept entirely free of disease.
So a literal paradise. No stress, no survival pressure whatsoever.
Exactly. The absolute pinnacle of safety and comfort.
So what happened?
Well, by day 315 of the experiment, a complete societal collapse began, which Calhoun termed the behavioral sink. Without the necessity of struggle, the population's psychology just warped. The mice stopped doing anything difficult. And a specific group emerged that Calhoun called the beautiful ones.
The beautiful ones.
Yeah, these mice isolated themselves. They refused to mate. They refused to fight. They refused to parent. All they did all day was eat, sleep, and groom their fur. They became physically pristine, but socially and psychologically totally vacant.
They completely lost their fundamental nature.
They did. Mothers began abandoning their young. Random, unprovoked violence broke out among the males. Eventually, despite having infinite resources and zero external threats, the population completely ceased reproducing and went extinct. The comfort literally killed them from the inside out.
That is horrifying. And this is exactly why this matters so much to us today, because Universe 25 isn't just an obscure science experiment from the 60s. It is a perfect metaphor for the living room of anyone listening right now.
Yes.
The sofa, the Netflix subscription, the modern conveniences. When we rely on perfectly curated social feeds and food delivery apps, we are isolating ourselves from the struggle of reality. If we aren't careful, we become the beautiful ones. We look fine on the outside, but our internal drive, our AMCC, is shrinking into nothing. Human souls desire expansion, and a life of pure comfort is just a slow mental assassination.
It is the ultimate consequence of the disease of mediocrity. And to synthesize everything we've explored today, from the neurology of the AMCC to Goggins' 40% rule to the tragic end of Universe 25, it brings us to a profound thought experiment regarding human potential.
Let's hear it.
Imagine you are at the end of your life, lying on your deathbed, and 2 strangers are brought into the room to stand before you. One of them is the person you actually became. The other is the person you could have become if you had chosen to endure the friction and tap into that 60% reserve tank. If there is a massive, unrecognizable gap between those 2 people, that is the definition of hell. But if you look at the person you could have been, and they look identical to the person you are, that is heaven.
Man, that is an incredibly powerful way to frame the stakes. It all comes down to closing that gap between who you are and who you are capable of being. And I want to leave you with one final provocative detail from our sources to turn over in your mind long after this audio stops. Think about the space program. When NASA is selecting astronauts people, they are going to strap to millions of pounds of explosives and shoot into the terrifying, deadly void of space. They don't just look for candidates with a perfect list of easy successes. They aren't looking for pure, frictionless talent. They actively look for individuals who have experienced massive, crushing failures. They look for grit. They want to see exactly how a candidate behaves when everything goes entirely wrong. So, as you step out of this deep dive and back into your daily routine, ask yourself, if an agency was auditing the timeline of your life right now, what would they find? Would they see a neatly manicured resume of safe, easy wins and avoided discomfort? Or would they see a masterclass in how to take a brutal hit, take up your broken feet, and keep running? It is entirely up to you. Until next time.